My name is Nora Bennett, and 3 months ago I was standing behind the counter of a small roadside diner in Colorado, wearing a faded uniform and pouring coffee for strangers. I was 61 years old, broke, exhausted, and trying to piece together a life that had been taken from me by the very people I trusted most, my own children. I never imagined that the rest of my life would begin inside that diner. The air smelled of coffee, bacon grease, and memories that weren't mine. I worked 10-hour shifts in shoes that rubbed my feet raw and an apron that never seemed to lose the smell of fried onions, no matter how many times I washed it. Yet even with all that, the hardest part wasn't the physical labor. It was pretending I was fine while my heart was still in mourning. People often talk about the moment everything falls apart, but they rarely talk about the days afterward, when you still have to wake up and keep going. For me, that meant rising before sunrise, tying my hair back, and reminding myself that surviving the day was enough. In the middle of all that struggle, someone unexpected appeared. A quiet, older man who always sat alone in booth 4. His name was Walter Price, and he came in every day at exactly 11:30. At first, I barely noticed him. He looked fragile, almost invisible, like someone the world had quietly forgotten. I didn't know it then, but the man everyone overlooked was about to change everything. He would become the turning point in a story I never imagined I would live, and if you stay with me, you'll understand how one small act of kindness can alter the course of an entire life. Before the diner, before the uniform and the aching feet, I was a widow trying to survive the loss of my husband. Tom Bennett and I had built a quiet life over 35 years. We raised 2 children, Logan and Madison, in a small but warm home on the edge of town. We worked hard, saved what we could, and believed, like so many do, that family would always take care of one another. When Tom passed away, the house became unbearably silent. I was drained by grief, barely sleeping, barely eating, overwhelmed by paperwork I didn't understand. That was when Logan and Madison stepped in. At least, that's what I believed at the time. They told me they wanted to help. They said they were worried about me being alone, that handling finances after a death could be overwhelming. Logan spoke softly, choosing his words carefully, making me feel like everything was under control. Madison brought folders and documents, explaining that she had researched ways to protect my assets. Grief makes you vulnerable, and I trusted them completely. They told me the papers were for tax purposes. They said transferring certain accounts would make things easier later. I signed because I could not imagine my own children deceiving me. I signed because my heart was shattered and I didn't have the strength to argue. I signed because they said it was for my future. Weeks later, the truth arrived like a blow I never saw coming. Notices began showing up in the mail. The house I had lived in for 3 decades had been sold. My retirement account was gone. Every bit of savings Tom and I had built together had vanished. I learned that the documents I signed gave Logan full control over my finances and allowed Madison to liquidate assets in my name. When I confronted Logan, he barely reacted. He shrugged and said I didn't need that much space anymore. He said the money was being put to better use. Those were his exact words. Madison's response was colder. She told me it was time I learned to live simply. In the span of 1 month, I went from a woman with a home, security, and decades of savings to someone standing in a tiny studio apartment with peeling paint and rent I could barely afford. Grief had already taken my husband. Now my own children had taken everything else. That was the moment I realized I had no one left to rely on but myself. Starting over at 61 isn't something you plan for, it's something you endure. When I took the job at Pine Grove Diner, I told myself it would only be temporary, just until I figured things out, just until I could breathe again. The diner sat along an old highway outside town, the kind of place where truck drivers stopped for black coffee and families pulled in for pancakes during weekend road trips. The neon sign flickered on every morning at 6, and by 6:15, the smell of bacon and burnt toast filled every corner of the building. Most mornings, I was the one unlocking the doors, switching on the lights, tying my apron, and bracing myself for another 10-hour shift. The work was exhausting in ways I'd never known. My shoes felt too thin, my back ached by mid-morning, my hands were always dry from constant washing. But the hardest part was pretending I belonged somewhere that didn't know I had once had a home of my own, or a life that felt safe. Then, on my third day, I noticed him. A thin, older man with silver hair and gentle eyes. He walked slowly, as though every step required focus, and he always chose booth 4 by the window. His clothes were clean but worn, his hands trembled slightly. He carried a small coin pouch and carefully counted exact change. He ordered the same thing every day, 1 cup of coffee and a single slice of toast, $2.50. Never more. There was something about the way he ate that stayed with me. He took small bites, as if trying to make the meal last. He held the warm mug with both hands, like someone grateful just to feel the heat. At first, I served him the same way I served everyone else, but after a few days, I found myself leaving an extra cat of butter on his plate, then a small container of jam. Tiny gestures that cost me nothing, but seemed to brighten his quiet mornings. He always looked up and thanked me with a soft smile, the kind that carried both gratitude and sadness. I eventually learned his name was Walter Price. He spoke politely, never complained, and moved through the world as if trying to not take up too much space. Most customers barely noticed him, but something about him made me pay attention. I didn't know it then, but that simple cup of coffee was the first thread in a story neither of us expected. As days passed, Walter became part of my routine in ways I hadn't anticipated. Every morning around 11, I glanced at the clock, waiting for the door to open and for him to walk in with his careful steps and quiet presence. And every day, he sat in booth 4, folded his hands, and offered me the same gentle smile. Our conversations began small, a comment about the weather, a memory about his late wife, a question about how long I'd worked at the diner. His voice was soft and steady, carrying the warmth of someone who had spent a lifetime observing quietly rather than speaking loudly. Over time, the conversations deepened. Walter told me Helen had passed away 2 years earlier. He spoke about caring for her during her final months, how it had been both the hardest and most meaningful time of his life. His eyes softened when he mentioned her, but there was loneliness in the way he folded his napkin afterward, as if grief still lived in its creases. One afternoon, when the diner was unusually slow, he asked about my family. I hesitated. I didn't like talking about Logan and Madison, but something in Walter's expression told me he wouldn't judge, so I told him everything. How I trusted my children, how I signed papers without reading closely, how I went from a 3-bedroom home to a rented studio overnight. Walter didn't interrupt. He listened in a way I hadn't experienced in a long time. When I finished, he carefully set his coffee cup down and said, "You deserved better than that, Nora. You gave them everything." It was the first time anyone had ever said those words to me. After that, sharing lunch with him felt natural. If I brought half a sandwich, he always tried to push more food toward my side. If I offered him something extra, he accepted with a humble nod. There was no pity between us, just 2 people who had lost more than they ever expected, and were trying to understand what was left. Looking back, that time felt like the beginning of healing, not because my circumstances had changed, but because being understood made me feel human again. And though I didn't realize it then, Walter was watching everything, every gesture, every choice, every detail. At the time, he was just a kind older man who appreciated conversation, but he would soon prove to be much more than that. It was a cold Thursday in late November when everything shifted again. The kind of morning when the wind cuts straight through your coat and customers rush inside to escape the cold. The diner was louder than usual, plates clattering, coffee pouring nonstop. I was carrying a tray of orders when the bell above the door chimed. I looked up, and for a moment the world stopped. Logan Bennett, my son, walked into the diner like he owned it. He wore a tailored gray coat, polished leather shoes, and a confidence that bordered on arrogance. His hair was perfectly styled, his expression sharp. He carried himself like someone who had never known hardship. He scanned the room with mild disgust, as if the vinyl booths and flickering lights were beneath him. Then his eyes landed on me. I froze. I hadn't seen Logan in months, not since the day I learned what he and Madison had done. Part of me hoped he was there to apologize, to make things right, to finally acknowledge how deeply he had hurt me. Instead, a smirk curved across his face. "Mom," he said, loud enough for half the diner to hear, "I thought I saw something familiar through the window. I had to come in and check, and here you are." His eyes swept over my uniform, my worn shoes, the coffee pot in my hand. His amusement grew cruel. "This is quite a look for you." Heat rushed to my cheeks as nearby conversations went silent. I tried to speak quietly. "Logan, can we talk somewhere private?" "Private?" he laughed, sharp and careless. "Why are you embarrassed?" My throat tightened. I wanted to disappear. Before I could respond, Logan leaned closer and said, "You look pitiful, Mom, working here at your age. It is sad, really." Before I could defend myself, a chair scraped across the floor. Walter Price stood up from booth 4. He did not move like a frail man that day. His posture straightened, his steps deliberate. He walked toward us with an expression I had never seen on him before, something sharper, colder. "Excuse me," he said, addressing Logan with a steady voice I could not help overhearing. Logan turned, irritated. "This is a family matter, sir. Stay out of it." Walter did not flinch. He reached into his coat, pulled out his phone, and pressed a single button. "Run a full background check on a man named Logan Bennett," he said, calmly, into the phone. "I wanted everything by this afternoon." Logan's face drained of color. "Who are you?" Walter's eyes held his without blinking. "Someone who believes in consequences." The diner felt frozen in place. I stood between the son I no longer recognized and the man I barely understood, and for the first time I sensed that something far bigger than humiliation was unfolding, something that would change all of our lives. The next morning I arrived at the diner earlier than usual. I had barely slept. My mind kept replaying the moment Walter stood up to Logan, the moment his hands stopped trembling, the moment he made that phone call with absolute authority. Nothing about it made sense. The quiet old man who counted quarters for toast should not have been able to make my son turn pale with a single sentence. At 11:15, the diner door opened and Walter walked in. He looked exactly as he always did. Same worn coat, same slow, careful steps, same quiet smile when he reached booth 4. But now that I had seen behind the curtain, nothing about him felt ordinary anymore. I poured his coffee with shaky hands. "Walter," I said softly, "we need to talk." He gestured to the seat across from him. "Sit, Nora." I slid into the booth, bracing myself. "Who are you?" For a moment, he simply held my gaze, his expression gentle but serious. "My name is Walter Price." That part was true, and I am 74 years old. That was true as well, but there was more. So much more. "I was not entirely honest with you about my past," he continued. "Before my wife passed, I spent 50 years building companies, technology, manufacturing, real estate. I started with almost nothing and worked my way into owning or holding major stakes in more than 150 businesses." My breath caught. 150? Walter nodded, almost apologetically. After Helen died, my children became impatient. They wanted me to update my will immediately. They wanted numbers. They wanted timelines. They wanted control. I thought of Logan and Madison and felt a painful jolt of recognition. When I refused, Walter continued, they pulled away. Calls stopped, visits ended. I became an obligation they no longer wished to carry. So I made a choice. I decided to disappear for a while and see the world from a different angle, to see who people really were when they thought I had nothing to offer. He looked down at the cup of coffee warming his hands. And then I met you. My heart tightened. I did not know what to say, Nora, he said gently. You shared your lunch with me when you barely had enough for yourself, not because you thought I was someone important, not because you wanted anything, but because you saw someone who looked lonely. He leaned back, eyes steady. That kind of kindness is rare, and yesterday your son revealed exactly who he is. My call was not revenge, it was truth. I swallowed hard. So what happens now? Walter folded his hands. Now we wait for the consequences to reach him. The consequences arrived faster than I expected. By Wednesday afternoon, my phone buzzed while I was sweeping near the counter. I stepped into the back room to answer it, already sensing the storm on the other end. "Mom," Logan said, and his voice was nothing like the confident man who walked into the diner 2 days earlier. "Something is happening, something bad." I held the phone tightly. "What do you mean?" "I just got let go." They called it restructuring, but they told me to clear my desk by the end of the day. No notice, no chance to appeal, just gone. A part of me wanted to comfort him. Another part remembered standing alone in an empty house with a stack of legal notices and no one to help me. I kept my voice steady. "I am sorry to hear that." "Sorry?" he repeated, sounding almost offended. "That is all you have to say? Mom, I have a mortgage, I have bills, I have kids. What am I supposed to do now?" I stared at the floor, remembering his words from months ago, words he used when I begged for answers. "You will figure something out, Logan." There was silence on the line, as if he recognized the echo of his own cruelty, but desperation overpowered reflection. "Something else happened too," he said. "The bank called. They said there is an issue with my mortgage paperwork and they need immediate review, and my credit card just froze. What is going on?" I closed my eyes. Walter had warned me this would happen, but hearing the fear in my son's voice still cut deep. "I do not know, Logan. You might want to talk to your bank." Over the next 3 days, the calls kept coming. Logan's voice grew more frantic with each one. He said he could not access certain accounts. He said a letter arrived demanding updated documentation within 48 hours. He said he was falling behind and everything was collapsing at once. On Friday night, he finally said the words I had been waiting years to hear. "Mom, I need help, please." My heart broke a little at the sound, but this time help could not come from blind trust or sacrifice. This time help had to start with truth. "Meet me tomorrow," I said quietly, 10:30, Pine Grove. He hesitated. "Will he be there, that man?" I took a breath. "Yes, Logan, Walter will be there, and it is time you listened." Saturday morning arrived with a sharp winter wind that rattled the diner windows. I wiped down booth 4 twice, even though it was already clean. My hands would not stop trembling, and I kept checking the clock as if that would steady me. Walter sat quietly with his usual toast and coffee, reading the paper like it was any other morning, but I knew he was waiting too. At exactly 10:30, the door opened. Logan stepped inside. He looked nothing like the polished man who had mocked me days earlier. His hair was uncombed, his coat wrinkled, and there were deep shadows under his eyes. He walked toward us with the heaviness of someone carrying far more than a bad week. "Mom," he said softly, his voice rough, "I am here." I gestured for him to sit. Walter folded his newspaper and rested it beside his plate. He studied Logan calmly, without hostility, but with a clarity that made Logan shift uncomfortably. Logan took a slow breath. "I know you're the one behind this, the job, the bank, all of it. I do not understand how, but I know it was you." Walter nodded. "You are correct." Logan swallowed, stunned by the blunt confirmation. "But why? Why destroy everything I have?" Walter leaned forward, his hands clasped. "I did not destroy anything. I simply removed the illusions. Your financial stability was built on money that was not yours. Your confidence came from taking advantage of a mother who trusted you. What fell apart was never solid to begin with." Logan's eyes turned toward me, filled with confusion, regret, and something close to shame. "Mom, I am sorry. I thought I was helping. I thought I was making the right decision." I felt my chest tighten. This was the apology I once begged for. This was the honesty I thought I would never hear. Walter reached into his coat and set a document on the table. One simple sheet of paper. "This," he said, "is your choice. You can return every dollar you took from your mother along with interest and commit to rebuilding your relationship with honesty. If you do, your job will be restored on Monday, your mortgage will resume normal terms, your accounts will stabilize." Logan stared at the document, his hands shaking. "And if I refuse?" Walter's tone stayed calm. "Then what is already collapsed will continue collapsing. You will learn what it means to start from nothing the way your mother had to." For a long moment no one spoke. The diner hummed softly in the background. Finally, Logan lifted his eyes to mine. "Mom, please, I do not want to lose you. I do not want to be this person anymore." I picked up the pen and placed it gently in front of him. "Then show me." With trembling hands, Logan signed his name, and just like that, the first step toward redemption began. 6 months passed, and life settled into a rhythm I never expected to experience again. Not one built on fear or instability, but on something steadier, something warm, something hopeful. I moved into a small but beautiful home that Walter owned on the west side of town. It was not a mansion, it was not meant to impress anyone, it was simply a place filled with sunlight, quiet mornings, and the gentle comfort of knowing I was safe. Walter lived in the main house, and I stayed in the cozy guest cottage beside it. We shared breakfast most days, walked in the evenings, and found comfort in each other's presence. It was companionship without pressure, understanding without demands. Madison kept his promise. He went to therapy twice a week, he took responsibility at work, earned back the respect he had lost, and became intentional about repairing what he had broken. Slowly, he rebuilt his marriage. Slowly, he rebuilt his integrity, and slowly, he rebuilt his relationship with me. Every Tuesday afternoon, we had lunch together at a little place near the river. For the first time in years, we talked as mother and son instead of strangers pretending nothing was wrong. Madison was a different story. She stayed in California, kept her distance, and sent occasional holiday cards that felt more like obligations than affection. The old me would have carried that pain like a stone in my chest, but now I understood something important. Healing does not always mean getting every person back. Sometimes healing is accepting who chooses to stay. One evening, as we watched the sun dip behind the pines, Walter told me he had updated his will. "I want you to have everything when my time comes," he said, "not out of debt or gratitude, but because you're family to me now." I didn't know what to say other than this simple truth. "You saved my life, Walter." He shook his head gently. "No, Nora, you saved your own life. I only reminded you that you deserve to." For the first time in a long time, I believed him. Looking back on everything that happened, it still amazes me how a life can fall apart and rebuild itself in ways you never expect. 6 months earlier, I had stood in a diner kitchen, wiping tears off my face, wondering how I would survive another day. I felt abandoned, betrayed, and invisible. But the truth is, sometimes you have to lose everything you thought you needed in order to discover what was meant for you all along. I learned that family is not defined by shared blood or last names. Family is defined by the people who show up when the world falls quiet around you. People who choose you. People who care without condition, without expectation. For years, I believed my worth was tied to being needed by my children, but losing what I had built for them forced me to finally ask what I deserved for myself. Walter taught me that kindness is never wasted. The world often measures success by wealth, status, or outward achievements, but real strength comes from the choices you make when no one is watching. A small act like sharing part of your lunch with someone who seems to have nothing can reveal the heart you carry. And sometimes, just sometimes, that kindness comes back to you in ways greater than you ever imagined. As for Logan, his journey reminds me that people can change if they are willing to face the truth about who they have become. Forgiveness does not mean forgetting. It means allowing growth, holding boundaries, and giving someone the chance to be better than their worst mistake. I hope my story reminds you that even in the darkest chapters of life, there are still unexpected beginnings waiting. You are stronger than you think, and you deserve to be treated with respect, love, and honesty. If this story resonated with you, feel free to like, share, and tell me in the comments where you are watching from. Your stories matter, and someone out there may need to hear them just as much as you needed to hear mine. Thank you for staying with me until the end.